For this video, we are going to discuss Article 158 of the Revised Penal Code, which is the crime of evasion of service of sentence on the occasion of disorders, conflagrations, earthquakes, or other calamities. Article 158. A convict who shall evade the service of his sentence by leaving the penal institution where he shall have been confined on the occasion of disorder resulting from a conflagration, earthquake, explosion, or similar catastrophe, or during a mutiny in which he has not participated, shall suffer an increase of 1/5 of the time still remaining to be served under the original sentence, which in no case shall exceed 6 months, if he shall fail to give himself up to the authorities within 48 hours following the issuance of a proclamation by the Chief Executive announcing the passing away of such calamity. Convicts who, under the circumstances mentioned in the preceding paragraph, shall give themselves up to the authorities within the above-mentioned period of 48 hours shall be entitled to the deduction provided in Article 98. These are the elements of Article 158. First element, the offender is a convict by final judgment. Second element, he is confined in a penal institution. Third element, there is disorder resulting from conflagration, earthquake, explosion, similar catastrophe, or there is a mutiny in which the offender has not participated. Fourth element, the offender evades the service of his sentence by leaving the penal institution where he is confined on the occasion of such disorder or during the mutiny. And number 5, or fifth element, the offender fails to give himself up to the authorities within 48 hours following the issuance of a proclamation by the President of the Philippines announcing the passing away of such calamity. Let's go back to the first element, that the offender is a convict by final judgment. I want you, for purposes of this first element, to refer to my previous video titled Evasion of Service of Sentence under Article 157 of the Revised Penal Code. You can find the explanation of this at the 1 minute and 39-second mark of the said video. Second element, that he is confined in a penal institution. Now, unlike in Article 157, I am referring to evasion of service of sentence. This article, Article 158, applies only to convicts by final judgment who are serving sentence inside a penal institution. Meaning to say, they are those who are actually serving sentence inside prison. Because Article 157, evasion of service of sentence, applies not only to those who are completely deprived of liberty, but also to those who are only partially deprived of liberty. Why? Because Article 157 applies to those convicts who are imposed the penalty of destierro, which is only a partial deprivation of liberty. And you already know that those serving the penalty of destierro need not be confined in a penal institution because they are merely banished to a certain place, or they are merely prohibited from going to or entering inside the place designated in the sentence. Third element, that there is disorder resulting from conflagration, earthquake, explosion, or similar catastrophe, or there is a mutiny in which the offender has not participated. Take note that the mere occurrence of a conflagration, earthquake, etc. is not enough. Such calamity must produce some disorder inside the penal institution. In the case of mutiny, however, it is not necessary that a disorder should result, but we can also say, that When there is mutiny, there is at least some disorder, because a mutiny happens when the offenders or the convicts intimidate or employ violence against the superior officers of that penal institution. Conflagration means an extensive fire which destroys a great deal of property. So when there is conflagration, I think it necessarily follows that a disorder should result. Now, what about the long phrase, if he shall fail to give himself up to the authorities within 48 hours following the issuance of a proclamation by the chief executive announcing the passing away of such calamity? What is punished here is not the leaving of the penal institution by the convict, but the failure of the said convict to return or to give himself up to the authorities within 48 hours after the proclamation by the President announcing the passing away of the calamity. Now, what are the takeaways here? When you say failure of the convict to give himself up to the authorities, it only requires that the offender should surrender, at the very least, to any authority within the place where he is currently situated. Like, for example, if he was imprisoned in Manila and within 48 hours after the announcing by the president of the passing away of the calamity, he surrendered to the police authorities in Bicol. That would be sufficient for purposes of Article 158. He need not actually return to the penal institution where he was imprisoned, because the article merely requires that the convict should give himself up to the authorities within 48 hours after the proclamation announcing the passing away of such calamity. Now, the 48-hour period should be reckoned from the proclamation, meaning to say, if there is no proclamation yet coming from the President announcing the passing away of the calamity, then the 48-hour period will not commence to run. That is how it should be interpreted, because the article is very specific. Within 48 hours after the proclamation announcing the passing away of the calamity, not within 48 hours after the escape. Take note that if the convict who escaped failed to give himself up within such 48 hours, he will suffer an increase of 1/5 of the time still remaining to be served under the original sentence, but in no case shall it exceed 6 months. On the other hand, if the convict gives himself up within said 48 hours, he is entitled to a deduction of 1/5 of his sentence, as provided in Article 98 of the Revised Penal Code. So, take note of the difference. In the first case, he will suffer an increase of 1/5 of the time still remaining to be served. So, if he had 2 years left to be served, 1/5 of that will be added to his remaining sentence. But in the case of a convict who gave himself up within 48 hours, he will instead be entitled to a deduction of 1/5 of his entire sentence, as provided in Article 98 of the Revised Penal Code. Now, the convict who escaped must not have participated in the mutiny. Otherwise, he will not be entitled to a deduction of 1/5 of his sentence, even if he gave himself up within the said 48 hours. Also, the convict who participated in the mutiny or employed violence or intimidation as his means of escape will instead be liable under Article 157, evasion of service of sentence, not under Article 158.